In the vast, humming heart of the Detroit industrial plant, where metal groaned and sweat mingled with dust, Ethan Mercer moved quietly through the shadows. His world was painted in shades of grime and oil stains, far removed from the gleaming machines that dominated the factory floor. As the janitor's son, Ethan was a ghost among giants, seen but rarely noticed, a whisper behind the roar of engines. The air was thick with the scent of machine grease and forgotten dreams, and Ethan knew every corner like the back of his hand, every hidden nook where the light barely reached. The other workers barely spared him a glance, their eyes filled with the dull resignation of men who had long accepted their place in the hierarchy. To them, Ethan was nothing more than the boy who swept floors and emptied trash bins, a mere extension of his father's janitorial duties. Yet beneath the surface of his quiet exterior burned a restless fire, a yearning to be seen, to break free from the suffocating shadows. While others mocked his ambitions, Ethan nurtured a secret world of knowledge and dreams, quietly absorbing the mechanics' every movement, memorizing the subtle whir of pistons, the precise way a bolt should turn. He would spend hours after school lurking near the workshops, where the real magic happened, watching in silence as seasoned men argued over engines and wrenches. No one invited him in, no one offered a word of encouragement. Laughter often followed his presence, sharp and biting, echoing like a cold wind through the cavernous halls. But Ethan did not flinch. Each sneer, each dismissive glance only stoked the embers of his determination. He was a student of perseverance, a silent apprentice to a world that refused to acknowledge him. His father, humble and worn by years of unnoticed labor, carried a quiet pride that he never voiced aloud. To him, Ethan was more than the janitor's boy. He was hope distilled into flesh and bone. In their small, dimly lit home, filled with the faint clatter of distant machinery, they shared whispered lessons and stories. Tales of endurance, of grit, of fighting an unseen battle not with fists, but with heart and mind. It was in these moments that Ethan's resolve solidified, each story a brick in the foundation of his quiet rebellion. The factory's pulse was relentless. Every morning, Ethan entered its gates carrying the weight of invisibility, yet within him stirred the possibility of transformation. Each sweep of his broom was a quiet rhythm in the symphony of labor. Every discarded scrap he collected was a reminder that even the overlooked held value. Beneath the flickering fluorescent lights, amid the clang of steel and the hiss of steam, Ethan dreamed, not of escape, but of mastery. For in the shadows, he was not lost. He was preparing for a day when his silence would speak louder than the machines. Ethan's quiet world of shadows was shattered the day the announcement came, a sweeping wave of layoffs destined to drown the hopes of hundreds. The factory that had long been a fortress of routine and silence now roared with uncertainty, its once steady heartbeat faltering. Men who had been brothers in toil, standing shoulder to shoulder through years of sweat and sacrifice, suddenly turned into strangers marked by fear and desperation. The air, already heavy with oil and grime, grew thick with whispered rumors and hollow promises. For Ethan, the news was not just a threat to livelihoods, but a brutal test of his fragile dreams. The factory was more than a workplace. It was the crucible of his identity, the silent witness to his invisible apprenticeship. He watched from the sidelines as machines fell silent one by one, as skilled hands once steady with pride trembled with the weight of impending loss. The camaraderie that had once woven men together unraveled, replaced by suspicion and bitterness. And in the middle of the storm, Ethan's own role seemed to shrink further into insignificance. But the greatest blow came unexpectedly. The foreman, a gruff man whose scowl was as familiar as the factory's clang, called Ethan aside with a coldness that cut deeper than the winter wind. He told Ethan bluntly that the company would no longer tolerate distractions, the subtle code for pushing boundaries beyond a janitor's place. Ethan's attempts to learn, to grow, were not just dismissed but deemed dangerous, a challenge to the rigid order. The message was clear: stay in your lane, or be crushed beneath it. Pain twisted inside Ethan's chest, a raw, and biting ache. Years of silent observation, stolen knowledge, and secret hope now seemed like folly, a fool's dream in a world built to break spirits. Yet, beneath the weight of rejection, something fierce and unyielding sparked to life. He refused to vanish into the shadows, refused to be silenced by fear or scorn. If the factory was a battlefield, then he would fight, not with brute force, but with every ounce of courage and cunning he possessed. That night, beneath the pale glow of a single, flickering bulb in his cramped room, Ethan's resolve crystallized. He pored over blueprints he had secretly borrowed, piecing together the complex dance of machinery with the precision of a scholar and the passion of a dreamer. Every line, every curve on those faded sheets whispered secrets the factory had tried to lock away from him. His fingers traced the paths of gears and pistons, imagining the harmony of their movement, the possibility of unlocking something new, something better. The days that followed were a relentless storm of challenges. Ethan's secret study was a fragile lifeline in a sea of chaos. He faced not only the practical hurdles of mastering intricate machinery without formal training, but the relentless tide of doubt gnawing at his spirit. Coworkers sneered behind his back, his father warned of the dangers of dreaming too loud, and the factory walls seemed to close in tighter with every passing day. Yet, with every setback, Ethan grew more determined, each failure a stepping stone rather than a barrier. The greatest test came when the machinery he had been quietly repairing, small, almost invisible adjustments, was finally noticed. The foreman's eyes burned with suspicion and rage, accusations of sabotage hanging heavy in the stale air. Ethan stood trembling, his heart a wild drumbeat of fear and defiance. But instead of collapsing under the weight of false blame, he spoke, clear, calm, and unwavering. He explained what he had done, how he had seen the faults others ignored, how he had tried to save the very factory that threatened to cast him out. It was a gamble, a fragile moment where silence could have meant exile or worse. But in that instant something shifted. A few eyes softened, a few hardened faces cracked with reluctant respect. The factory, cold and indifferent, revealed a flicker of warmth in its unforgiving heart. For Ethan, it was not victory, but a door slightly ajar, a chance to prove that even those born in shadows could shape the light. In the dim light of dawn, Ethan's small hands moved with a quiet purpose, fingers nimble yet trembling with anticipation. Those hands, so often overlooked and dismissed, were beginning to weave a miracle born from years of silent yearning and hidden labor. The factory, once a cold and unyielding giant, seemed to lean in, holding its breath as the fragile miracle unfolded. With each careful turn of a wrench, each precise adjustment of a worn gear, Ethan breathed life back into the machines that had long been declared relics of a dying age. It wasn't just metal and oil he worked with, it was hope. A hope so fragile that one wrong move could shatter it, yet so fierce that it refused to be extinguished. The echoes of clanking tools and grinding cogs filled the cavernous space, but beneath that noise was the soft rhythm of a heartbeat that belonged to a dreamer who refused to fade into the background. The men who had once looked down on him began to notice, their skepticism giving way to curiosity, then grudging admiration. The air shifted subtly. The factory was no longer just a place of despair, but a stage for quiet redemption. Ethan's hands bore the marks of his struggle, the calluses, the faint scars, the grime that refused to wash away, but they moved with a grace that spoke of more than toil. They moved with the wisdom of a man who understood that change often began in the smallest details. He tightened a bolt here, realigned a belt there, and with each action, the machines began to hum a softer, steadier tune. The factory's heartbeat grew stronger, pulsing with renewed energy, as if acknowledging the unlikely architect of its revival. His efforts did not go unnoticed by Clara, the young engineer who had once dismissed him as nothing more than a janitor's apprentice. She watched from the shadows, her eyes widening in disbelief and growing respect. Clara's own hands, trained and skilled, trembled as she approached him, offering tools and knowledge with a hesitant smile. Together, Their hands, one small and weathered, the other steady and trained, began to rewrite the story of the factory. It was a union forged in quiet determination, bridging worlds that had seemed forever divided. Yet, the true miracle was not just in the machines brought back to life, but in the transformation of the people around them. The men who had once whispered cruel words began to ask questions, to listen, to believe. Walls of suspicion crumbled, replaced by tentative bonds of trust. Ethan's small hands had sparked something greater than mechanical repair. They had ignited the fragile flames of community and resilience. But even as hope blossomed, shadows lingered. The company's looming threat of closure remained a dark cloud, and the weight of years spent invisible still pressed heavily on Ethan's shoulders. He knew this miracle was but the first step in a much longer journey, one that would demand every ounce of courage and every beat of his resilient heart. The factory was awakening, but the battle for its soul was far from over. As the sun rose higher, casting warm light through the grimy windows, Ethan paused to wipe sweat from his brow. His small hands, once dismissed and overlooked, now held the power to shape the future, not just of the factory, but of everyone who called it home. In that moment, surrounded by the hum of machines and the quiet stirrings of change, Ethan understood that miracles are not born of grandeur, but of relentless faith and the unwavering courage of small hands willing to try. The miracle Ethan had quietly nurtured began to ripple far beyond the factory walls, carried on whispers that grew louder with each passing day. His small hands, once unseen and unappreciated, had crafted not only a revival of rusty machines, but had breathed new life into a faltering spirit that the whole town began to recognize. Suddenly, the janitor's apprentice was no longer just a shadow moving through the factory's corridors. He was a symbol of resilience, a beacon of hope against the creeping darkness of despair. The very air seemed charged with a fragile optimism, yet with that newfound light came the harsh glare of scrutiny. Reputation is a double-edged sword, and Ethan was about to learn this lesson in full. Praise came swiftly, carried by the eager tongues of neighbors, local papers, and even the factory workers who had once doubted his worth. The factory's management, once indifferent, now sought to ride the wave of Ethan's quiet success. But in the shadows of praise lurked skepticism, jealousy, and fear, forces just as potent and destructive. Rival factions within the company whispered behind closed doors, questioning how a boy with no formal training could achieve what seasoned engineers had failed to do. Rumors began to spread like wildfire, some harmless, others malicious, about shortcuts, sabotage, and hidden motives. Ethan felt the weight of these invisible battles pressing down on his shoulders. The simple pride he had felt earlier now mingled uneasily with anxiety. Every glance became a potential accusation, every conversation a veiled test. The factory, once a place of steady rhythm and hard work, turned into a battleground of trust and suspicion. Yet amid the turbulence, Ethan's resolve hardened. He knew that reputation was not simply given, it was forged in the fires of endurance and the truth of one's actions. The hands that had built the miracle would not tremble under attack. Clara stood firmly by his side, her presence a steady anchor in the storm. Together, they faced meetings filled with pointed questions and veiled threats, each challenge met with quiet confidence and careful proof. Their alliance, once born of necessity, grew into a force that could weather the harshest winds. Outside the factory, the community that had once been fractured began to rally more openly, inspired by Ethan's humility and persistence. Yet, the more their story spread, the more it attracted forces that sought to undermine their fragile progress, competitors eager to snatch the factory's contracts, bureaucrats wary of change, and even some workers reluctant to embrace new leadership. Late into the night, Ethan often found himself alone in the vast, silent factory, haunted by shadows deeper than those cast by flickering lights. The silence echoed with doubts and fears, not just his own, but those he sensed in the wary eyes around him. Could a single boy truly rewrite the fate of a crumbling giant? Was his effort enough to withstand the tidal waves of politics, power struggles, and human nature? Yet, Even in these quiet moments of vulnerability, his hands, scarred, worn, but unwavering, reminded him of every small victory, every revived machine, every hopeful face. The journey was no longer just about saving the factory. It was about fighting for dignity, for justice in a world that often rewarded cynicism over courage. The waves of turmoil would crash relentlessly, but Ethan was learning to ride them, shaping his reputation not with empty words or showy gestures, but with steadfast action and an unbreakable spirit. The miracle of small hands was becoming a legacy, fragile yet fiercely alive, and though the storm raged on, the dawn of a new day was coming, one built on the quiet strength of those who refused to be forgotten. The moment Ethan had been silently yearning for finally arrived like a breath of fresh air cutting through the stale factory gloom. A new opportunity, fragile, yet bursting with promise, unfolded before him. It came not as a thunderous decree, but as a quiet knock on the door of possibility, a whispered invitation to step beyond the shadows he had inhabited for so long. Word spread that a regional innovation contest was to be held, a chance for struggling factories to showcase ideas that could revive their industry and secure vital funding. For Ethan, this was not just a competition, it was a lifeline thrown to a drowning man, a chance to turn the tide once and for all. His heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and doubt as he considered the weight of this moment. The factory, his refuge and battleground, was counting on him. The same hands that had coaxed life back into rusted machines now trembled as they sketched plans and prepared prototypes, every detail infused with the desperation and hope of countless unseen hours. Clara's steady encouragement became a lifeline, her sharp mind and unwavering belief sharpening Ethan's own resolve. Together, they worked into the nights, melding raw determination with fragile innovation, building not just a machine but a vision for the future. As the day of the contest drew near, the factory's atmosphere shifted once again. The wary glances and hushed suspicions gave way to cautious anticipation. Workers who had once doubted now whispered encouragements. Even the management, once cold and indifferent, showed signs of cautious optimism. Yet beneath this fragile unity lay the ever-present tension of what failure might mean, a final closing of doors, a collapse of dreams painstakingly built from dust and sweat. Ethan's every breath was a silent prayer, every heartbeat a drum calling for courage. When the day finally came, Ethan stood before the panel of judges, the weight of countless hopes resting on his small shoulders. His hands, steady now with the quiet confidence of countless trials, unveiled the product of relentless nights and unyielding spirit, a device designed not just to save a factory, but to transform the very nature of their work, to weave efficiency with care, progress with humanity. The room held its breath, and in that silence, Ethan's dream stretched its fragile wings. The judge's eyes widened, the whispers grew into murmurs of disbelief and admiration, and for a fleeting moment, the factory and its people felt the first true spark of redemption. This was more than an invention. It was a beacon for all who had been cast aside, a testament that even the smallest hands could build miracles. The contest was not the end, but a crucial turning point, the step from shadows into light, from struggle into possibility. Ethan knew the journey was far from over, but for the first time, the horizon was wide and welcoming, and the future, once a distant dream, felt within reach. ChatGPT said. Ethan's return to the factory was not marked by grand fanfare or triumphant speeches, but by a quiet, almost reverent stillness that seemed to hum with the echoes of everything that had come before. The place that had once been a cavern of shadows and doubts now felt charged with a new energy, an energy born not only from machines humming back to life, but from the hearts and spirits of the people who toiled within its walls. As he stepped through the familiar iron gates, the weight of his journey settled upon him like a cloak, heavy with responsibility, yet lightened by hope. His eyes, once downcast with uncertainty, now shone with a calm fire that refused to be extinguished. The workers gathered slowly, their faces etched with exhaustion but softened by a shared sense of possibility. Whispers of respect and admiration floated through the air as Ethan moved among them, his hands roughened not only by labor, but by the countless battles he had silently fought. He did not speak of glory or miracles. Those were luxuries for others. Instead, he spoke in the language he knew best, of steady hands, tireless effort, and the quiet strength found in resilience. His story, once invisible, was now a beacon that invited others to believe, not just in him, but in themselves. In the days that followed, Ethan became more than just a symbol. He became a mentor, a guide, and a living testament to the power of perseverance. Young apprentices looked to him with newfound admiration, drawn not only to his skill but to the humility and kindness that radiated from him. Clara watched with quiet pride as the seeds they had planted together began to sprout, the factory's rhythm shifting from survival to renewal. Each repair machine, each smooth-running belt was a note in a larger symphony of revival, and Ethan's hands were the conductor's baton guiding the tempo. The true miracle, however, lay not just in machines or contests, but in the transformation of hearts. Stories of Ethan's journey spread beyond the factory's walls, through the town, the region, and into the lives of those who had long forgotten how to hope. His example sparked a quiet revolution, a reminder that even in the darkest places, light could take root and grow. Schools invited him to speak, community centers welcomed him to share his lessons, and the factory itself became a place where dreams were no longer crushed but nurtured. Ethan had become a living bridge between the past's hardships and the future's promise. Yet, amid the growing recognition, Ethan remained grounded. He knew that inspiration was fragile and fleeting if not sustained by action. His hands continued their work, repairing, building, teaching, never resting, never seeking applause. Because true change, he understood deeply now, came not from moments of triumph but from the everyday courage to keep going, to believe when others doubted, and to lend strength when it was needed most. As seasons turned, the factory thrummed with renewed purpose, a testament to what small hands, guided by unwavering spirit, could achieve. Ethan's return was more than a homecoming. It was the birth of a legacy, one that whispered through the hum of machines and the steady beat of countless hearts, telling the world that no matter how deep the shadows, the light of hope, once kindled, could never be extinguished.